What's your favorite kill in this movie? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Yoga Girl.
I'm not gonna ask you again. You stay out of that park. But one of these days, you're gonna find something that's gonna walk right through your traps.
The elevator pitch for this movie is this is a slasher film from the perspective of the killer. They're trying to reinvent the slasher genre, kind of like the same way Scream reinvented it. But instead of wasting your time with learning, you know, the character development, oh, who's the high school sweetheart? Oh, who's it? The movie knows you don't give a damn. So it just gets right by it. As a matter of fact, a lot of the times the movie comes up and they're mid-sentence. Like the characters are just in mid-sentence, or the conversation will start in the distance and you can't quite hear it. And then as our main character gets closer, he gets louder and louder and louder. So you miss a lot of key details, but it does not matter because the main character is the killer. And unfortunately, this killer is absolutely psychotic, which I think can make this movie quite divisive. This movie has no music, zero music, none. Has virtually no dialogue. It is literally just nature sounds. Just ooh, 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 brr, brr, crunch, crunch, crunch. This movie is all about Foley, and whoever the Foley artist on this movie was, crushed it. They say that a movie is like 40% visual and the rest is audio. And man, they took that to another level with this one. You could almost close your eyes in this movie and get the same result where you understand what is happening in the most terrifying way. Our main character, he doesn't hear the slasher music. He doesn't hear, you know, he doesn't hear it. all he hears is nothing. And as a matter of fact, the way the film is shot, so matter of fact, the insinuation is this guy is an absolute imbecile. He's thinking about nothing. He's got no plans in mind. He's not thinking ahead. He's just reacting. Sometimes he'll be walking and then a car horn will just go off, honk honk, and he'll be like, oh, and he'll just go that way. You know what I'm saying? Like, in the most terrifying way.
Kind of like what a animal would do.
Exactly.
One of the first things that you see when he wakes up from his grave, he sees an animal caught in a bear trap.
The camera pans up and there's a gajillion more bear traps right in his path. If me or you were in those woods, you'd see all those bear traps and you'd be like, don't move. And then the music would go, boom, and then there'd be a big overhead shot. We're showing all these bear traps all around you. And you'd say, my God, how are we going to get out of these? He doesn't say any of this shit. He's just like, eh. Because not only was our main character psychotic, but the camera is psychotic. The camera sees no difference from a tree, you know, to a log, to a dead body, to a pine cone. It doesn't see any difference. It's just the camera will just pan right over it. You know, to me, I loved it. That sent like a chill up my spine because there should be a musical sting. There should be screaming. There should be horror, but it's not. If I were to rename this movie, I would call it What the? Okay, because that's what you keep saying a lot. The movie opens, it's a window, and you're like, where is this window? Why are we here? And it stays there for eons to the point where you're like, what the? And then the movie shifts and the camera shifts and like a hand rises from the ground and you're like, what the? You know what I'm saying? And then it's like a zombie comes out and it feels out of place and you're like, why is there a zombie? Who is this? And then he just starts walking. And it's boring as hell. And you're like, what the? He shows up to some guys at a cabin and you're like, oh, this is not going to end well for anybody. No. What the f? And this is where I think the movie works really well because just like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers, our main character, who I'm going to call Johnny from now on, he has supernatural luck. It's just horrific luck. He walks this way, the guy's just having to turn that way. You know, just like in every horror movie. Yeah. He walks inside, the guys step outside. He just has the most horrifically good luck for him, but terrible luck for everyone else.
Everybody else.
There's a scene where he finds an axe and a guy runs off into the woods. He picks up the axe. He seems to just throw it randomly. He's just like, and it's like, headshot. And it's like, how do you stop this guy? Because this movie's from an insane person's point of view, the movie lingers on things that no movie should ever linger on. The movie will just follow our killer slowly, methodically, walking through a forest, walking through a field, walking through some daisies. And you, the audience, is like, what is he doing? What is happening? Right. Why am I looking at this? Until the big reveal. And you're like, oh no. And at that point, the movie, which was at previously super, super slow, suddenly becomes too fast. And you're like, oh, hold on. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of the things I really liked about this movie. And this movie it surprised me. This movie is shot so deeply unartfully that it becomes artful in a bizarre way. Like there's a scene where a character is being cut to pieces with like this axe contraption that I guess cuts logs. The camera just sits on him. And it's not even a particularly interesting shot. The shot's not framed for horror. It's not framed for shock. It's framed for, there it is. Because that's what our character sees, right? And you're like, oh my God. It makes it even more awful because it's framed so like flatly.
You know, when it comes to like the camera movements that you were saying where it just didn't care anything, I guess that's just the director saying that this is just what nature is. Okay. And the nature is also a reflection of what he is, you know? Right. So
there's a moment later in the film where a character is talking about a bear mauling someone, and you can't tell if she's actually talking about the bear or if she's talking about Johnny. And you're like, does she know what's happening? And the fact that you kind of start to blur our villain with a bear, you know, just an animal, is again so scary. There is no reasoning with him. There's no asking questions. There's no begging. And it's not because he's mean or heartless. He doesn't even really hear you. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't really care. That's not really his front of mind. To have a movie featuring a deeply psychotic person from their point of view is disorienting. It is, for me, unsettling. There was like no point in the movie where I could really sit still, even though the movie is begging you to sit still. And I also liked how the movie, it seems to hint that we are in a sequel, maybe? like the movie kind of picks up later. And so there's already legends about this guy. And there's people who have come back. They're like, do you remember me? You know, so it almost feels like we're in the sequel. He comes up to these campers, again, very much like Jason Voorhees. And they're all telling scary stories. And they're about him. And if you look in the background, and because the way the movie is shot, you just cannot help but look over people's shoulders. He's there. He's there. He's almost in every shot. Just standing there so still that you wouldn't see him. This is like the only bit of cinematic flair. And I'll be honest, it was kind of up because you could totally see the camera shadow on people's backs and stuff like that. So it was just a little shaky here. But there's a scene where the camera's like rotating around the campers, right? And it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning to the point where it's easy to get disoriented. But in the background, you can see our villain just sitting there. To be honest, I loved this movie. I thought this movie was a lot of fun. This was probably the most fun I've had in the theater in a very long time. But I also know and I understand that I'm weird. And I think if you are an average moviegoer who is used to watching, you know, Deadpool versus Wolverine or all that shit, or, you know, Inside Out, it's gonna be a hard movie for you. You're going to struggle. This movie, I think it like fucked me up in like the best way possible. I really liked how flat and matter of fact this movie is shot. But personally, I really loved how this movie presented these supernatural elements. It was supernatural, but they were natural to him. He sees them as no different from walking. So there's a scene where these two girls, they're like being real flirty and one wants to like swim in the lake and he sees them. And instead of being like, oh, let me go dive in, you know, he just walks into the water, just like, presumably he's walking on the bottom of the water just with no problem. Like that's, for me, that's like even creepier and weirder. That leads up to our favorite kill of the movie, the yoga girl. One of the interesting things about that scene is it's shot from a distance. It's kind of shot kind of wide, maybe a little too wide. And you're like, maybe they should get a little closer. This is kind of unartful. And the movie just slowly creeps in. And you're like, okay, that's close. And it keeps going. You're like, okay, that's a little too close. And it gets real close. And he just does the most heinous, horrific shit to this girl. It's almost difficult to describe. This movie is so over the top. It's more like Mortal Kombat, like gore. It's like so outrageous, so insane. Like, I'm gonna try my best to describe it, but he pulls her head through her stomach. And like, how can that work? I don't know. But it's so insane that you actually start laughing, and then you start kind of hating yourself for laughing. And then after it's over, he just kind of kicks the body down the hill. The body just doesn't make it to the bottom, kind of stops halfway. And he looks, and he's like,
on to the next, on to the next, on to the next.
I thought that was terrifying. You can't make this movie unless you love slashers, unless you've seen thousands and you understand the formula. That way you can flip it. And this felt like almost like a love letter to slashers.
This guy wakes up from the ground that he's been buried in because these kids, they take a pendant off of the grave of where he's buried.
It would seem that Johnny's trying to get his locket. And I guess the locket has a picture of his mother or something in it. I don't know. The movie doesn't dwell on it because he's psychotic, so it doesn't dwell on it. But what's really interesting is the movie very clearly ends maybe 30 minutes before the movie actually ends. There's a scene where our final girl is the last person alive, just like in every horror film. The final girl is there. And she gives him the locket. And that ends the movie. And the movie symbolizes it because the movie, for the first time, leaves Johnny in the woods. And it follows the girl.
Right.
And I feel like this is trying to say that the horror will never end for her. Because it follows her and she's like, and there's no music, nothing's happening. She keeps looking over her shoulder and really being really scared.
Looking into the woods.
Yeah, and looking to see if she's there, and you're looking too, you know? And then there's a scene where someone comes and picks her up, and you're like, don't trust her. Okay, but maybe you should trust her. I don't know. The horror
is that his mama?
Going.
No, okay.
Yeah, and seriously, I had that same thought. And you understand that the horror for her will never end. She is forever trapped in a horror movie because her friends and her boyfriend were hacked to pieces by this psycho. And like, again, to me, I think that's so much fun.
Hey man,
so fun.
You're on it. You're on the mark. And I believe that this film was good. I enjoyed it. It was fun. It might turn out to be a cult classic. You never know.
I think this movie will have legs as a cult classic. But there is no way in hell this will ever be a mainstream movie. And I just can't see a regular modern audience sitting through this movie. I can't see my own mother sitting through this movie. I can't see my dad sitting through this movie because it is so deliberately paced. The camera doesn't do any interesting swings, you know. I feel like there's no like really artful direction here. It's just as flat. And it's almost like the movie's trying to lull you to sleep. The movie's shot so flat and so matter of fact that's where the horror comes from. That the movie does not seem to notice that what's happening is just awful. I liked it a lot, but it is not for everyone.